It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me. Craig, shut up.
Hey, I need you guys to do these things.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump. So it's...
Welcome to Reality Check with Craig Price. This week, Barry Elms joins me to talk negotiating. Now, negotiating has never been my strong suit. I know what I want. I know what I'm willing to pay for it. And I really don't like the hassle of trying to find the right deal. That give and take is not my bag, Some people love it. We would take one of our elderly neighbors to the farmer's market because he knew his fruits. And the problem was that he would haggle to the point of embarrassment. I mean, not for him. Mostly my wife and I would be embarrassed as he was holding up mangoes, fighting for pennies on the price with a fruit merchant. It can be a little tiresome, and it can be a little bit embarrassing. But, negotiation is more than just about money and price. It's we negotiate lots of things in life. Where do you go on vacation? What we'll do when we're on vacation? What movie you and your wife will go see? If you go to the action movie this time, then we're going to have to go to the romantic comedy next time. So you're constantly negotiating, even if you don't think the stakes are really that high. It's just a part of life. So when I found out my guest today, Barry Elms, was speaking at the Association of Legal Administrators Region 2 Conference in Atlanta on September 27th, 1:30 Eastern Standard Time. I was also going to be there, opening and closing the event. I knew I had to get him on. And I knew I had the right guy when I asked him, and he said right away, "What's in it for me?" So let's dive in and talk to Barry Elms. And where are you from? Because the accent, I'm assuming you're in the UK of some sort.
I know. Well, look, I've been here close to 30 years, so it's a tough one to nail down. But originally, I'm out of London, England, home of the recent Olympics, as you might well remember. But,
I don't think we could get around it.
I know. I tell you, my family over there, all very proud. They're all excited that it went so well. But, I didn't expect any different.
No, and I don't know why anybody would. I mean, you guys are historically known to do things without much chaos or panic. I mean, the Blitzkrieg, you guys...
Yeah, and that's the upside is that. The downside is probably the same thing, too, is that they're typically a difficult nation to get excitable.
Right.
And so sometimes they do seem a little dour, but the truth of the matter is they love their country and they love doing the Olympics, and, I'm excited that it went well, but... That's where my original accent comes from, but I married an American girl close to 30 years ago, and, well, the rest, as they say, is history,
And what's her accent?
She's from, the girl I married is from Ohio, a good Midwest girl.
And you guys live in Boston, is that right?
Yeah. I think what happened initially is, while she lived in Ohio, I met her. I was actually speaking at a conference in Nashville, Tennessee, back in the early 80s. I'd come over as part of a delegation from the UK and was just explaining how we do things over there business-wise, and met her by the pool, would you believe?
Of course.
And but I had friends in Boston, and there was something about the culture on the East Coast that made me comfortable in terms of coming from the UK.
Well, it's New England, so...
I thought the Boston, I kind of loved it, man. I mean, I wasn't sure what I was going to make of Boston, but we're right up by the ocean. We bought a house up in a city called Newburyport.
Oh, sure.
Ocean town.
Well, I'm
24 years ago. Love it up there.
I'm originally from New Hampshire, so I'm well acquainted with all of the New England.
Yeah. Well, I can't fool you on that one, then.
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about.
I moved away.
Never went to Newburyport, but that's a pretty little city.
Oh yeah. Oh no, it's the entire coastline is very beautiful.
Yeah.
But
I think we got hooked. We weren't necessarily going to stay there because neither of us were kind of from the area. But once we got settled in and raised our boys there, it just seemed like the place to be. And, we've been happy here ever since. So yeah, people ask me about my accent all the time, Craig, because it is a tough one to pin down. I mean, 25 years ago, you'd have said the guy was the guy from the Gecko commercial,
Yeah.
But it's all changed a little now.
And I knew you were from the UK at some point. I mean, I could tell that you were, but you got, you can never quite pinpoint somebody from that area because sometimes even people who are diehard, born in Dublin, they lose their Irish a little bit, and then the Scottish has got their own little thing, and then the fact that I can understand you at all is a miracle for me. So I knew you.
Wait, how long have you been down in Texas? A couple of years or what?
I've been down in Texas for about 15 years, and
okay.
and I've tried not to get the accent because I want to sound like I'm.
I got a couple of clients down in Texas. I get down to Houston probably once a year anyway, so I know what it's like down there. I love the food, and people are always very charming. So it's a nice place to hang out.
Well,
except in the heart of summer, of course, gets a little tiring then. But
yeah, right about now it's awful. But I'm glad I got you on here because one of the things I am horrible at is negotiating. I'm not a negotiating person. I'm more of a. I guess someone once said, "Pay list or leave." I'm that kind of guy. I'm like, here's what I'm going to offer. If you like it, take it. If you don't, have a good day.
That's fairly typical, though, Craig. I mean, most people don't presume themselves to be good negotiators. In fact, those that do tend not to be anyway, because most people have a warped sense of what negotiating is all about. A lot of people think it's kind of beating up on the other guy and being tough and winning at all costs. And honestly, it isn't. I mean, you'll get a few deals that way, but you'll alienate so many people. What I try to get across to folks when you're negotiating is just coming to agreement. And, sometimes it just means saying okay, like you suggested. I mean, I tell people everywhere that as practiced as I am as a negotiator, and I am very practiced, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, I never negotiate with my wife. I think the reasons for that are fairly simple. I'd win every time, and then I'd end up in a one-bedroom furnished apartment. So there's no advantage in that.
Yeah,
it's not always a smart move to try and beat people up in negotiations. So I when I'm talking to folks about doing deals, I make it absolutely clear that it's not about winning and losing. It's just about getting agreement. And sometimes that might be as simple as saying okay, because what you've given up today in the negotiation, you may gain in a relationship long term. So, it's not necessarily about being a tough guy. Having said that, it's also not about conceding everything when you are strictly in a negotiation. I mean, once you know you're going to be negotiating, Craig, that's when I think your antenna comes up. Once you've made a conscious decision that, you're going to have to go back and forth with this individual, that's when you've got to remember the key here is to be persuasive, not necessarily creative. See, a lot of people, they think negotiating, once you get into the throes of it, is about give and take and compromise and bargaining. Those are all creative avenues you can go down. But if you're the only one going down there, you're giving away the store. And most good negotiators think in terms of being persuasive. That's why I broke those 5 elements I told you about. That game plan that breaks itself into persuasive and creative.
Absolutely, and I'm here with Barry Elms. He is going to be speaking along with myself at the Association of Legal Administrators Conference, Region 2 in Atlanta at the end of September. And I'm really glad you're here because you do break it down into 5 key elements, and we started to talk about that. You kind of the 5 keys are kind of broken into 2 keys: the persuasive and the creative. I think the first one that jumps out at me that I don't see a lot of times, especially like in politics. That's where I think a lot of the times we see negotiations, or in fact, we don't see the proper way to negotiate in politics. And the first thing you have is logic. And I think that's thrown out the window a lot of times when it comes to the negotiations in politics, because I know a lot of people in politics come to the table going, I won't even talk about, or this is not even on the table. So it's my way or nothing. That's not a negotiation.
Yeah. Essentially, what they've done is they've taken one of those 3 persuasive positions and put it in there in an intransigent way. They've gone with power. Essentially, they're saying that I won't budge, take it or leave it, which is essentially a negotiating position. Now, whether or not they will take it or leave it depends on how people respond to that. Because when I showed you those 3 persuasive elements of logic, power, and emotion, they're actually randomly listed. It's not a question of one being more important than the other. And correctly, if you're arguing from a point of view of logic, while the other person is arguing from a point of view of power, you're really not going anywhere, because they're not listening to your logic. They've made their power position, and they're stuck in it. The best thing you can do is when anybody takes a position in negotiation, and you just kind of mentioned how somebody can be very intransigent and say my way or the highway, know what it is. It's a power play. And you've got a couple of options. You can either match it with your own power play and see if they blink, or you can kind of work around it. You can finesse it. You can try a little bit of emotion, see if you can appeal to their better nature, or you can show some facts, some logic, if you will, and see if you can kind of get them to see it from your point of view. or you can move it into some kind of a creative discussion to say, look, I get it, you don't want to move, I understand that, but how about if I gave you this? So whilst they think they're not negotiating when they take that kind of hard line, essentially all they've done is they've played a card, the power card. What you do after that's entirely up to you, but you've got 4 other positions to look at, as well as the power card, if you want to match them with it. So, once you've got those 5 elements in your mind, the beauty of it is, Craig, is that you know one of them's being played. And all you've got to do is spot the one that's being played and then make a move accordingly. Best move, of course, is always to match the one you're up against, because then, if you match power with power, they recognize that, the only way to get a resolution is to move with you. And, there's lots of ways you can do it, but the beauty of it is there's only 5 things going on.
And I think a lot of people approach negotiations, at least I've seen, that it's got to be, you should come at it as a win-win, but I think people see it as a competition.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about that a little bit at the beginning in terms of people's egos kind of coming into play. And those guys amuse me a little bit when they are clearly assertive in their own style, because all they're doing is demonstrating their ego. And you can do all kinds of things. You can massage that ego and let people think they win by conceding things you don't need in order to get what you do. I mean, the nuances of negotiation are what make it a very fascinating topic to discuss for, literally hours, sometimes in my case, 2 days on end. I mean, I've done what they call master classes in negotiations, all around the world, including kind of right out in Kuala Lumpur and in Dubai. And that's 2 days. And that's when you get in all that nuanced stuff. But essentially, one of those 5 elements is always in play, one or more at any given time. And once you know that you've got someone who's arrogant or assertive or trying to beat you, you can make a couple choices. You can say, okay, let's go head to head with the guy. Because sometimes what I've found, Craig, and I don't know if this is part of your life experience, but people like themselves. And so to a certain extent, some of these power guys enjoy the power game. And if you match them with power, you actually get their respect, and it changes the dynamic.
Yeah, and I find that people who are like me are irritating. So slightly obnoxious and sarcastic. So
well, I read your profile. I know how you use that as a means to create a persona about yourself. But I don't find you irritating, so I'm not sure that that's the truth.
Well, we've only been in the conversation for 10 minutes. We'll work this out. But there's 2 things that I find that. Because logic, power, and emotion are going to be those are the ones that I think people do subconsciously. Either you're a logical person, or you're an emotional person, or you somehow come from ego and power. Right. But trade and compromise I believe those are more of a learned kind of response. You can learn how to compromise. That's why I call them
creative, I think, Craig. I mean, that's why I use the word creative aspects, because that's where you can learn the dynamics of them. I think that going back to the first part, and I will come to the creative, the trade and compromise in a second, but going to the first part, the real key is to listen to who you're dealing with. Get a read on which of those elements, logic, power, and emotion, is their root source here. Because if you can convince somebody using their argument, then you're going to much more likely get a solution without having to become creative. And I want to talk about creative, and I want to talk about trading and compromising, but I want to make it clear that good negotiators, and this is almost one of 10 commandments I wanted to be here. Good negotiators look for ways to support their argument, not for ways to change it. So the danger is, if you're too ready to get into creative stuff, you'll go there too quickly and concede too much. So what I do when I'm negotiating is I try and get a real feel for the other guy. What's their core position? Are they logically driven? Are they an emotional individual who wants a relationship as part of the solution? Or are they somebody, like we just said, who's ego-driven? Now, once you've got that kind of matched or massaged and worked with and got them off of their position, then you can get creative, because then you're going there together. And I think that's the key. Not going there on your own is most important. Not coming up with compromises or trades when the other guy's still entrenched in their own position.
And are there certain techniques you can use that, because I feel like you're going to have to ask questions, obviously, to find out, but some questions are more obvious than others. Like if you ask a question, you can definitely see they're trying to find out what kind of cards am I hiding, so to speak? Not that we're in a competition, but they're trying to learn. Some are more obvious than others. Is there a way that you can, approach that without hitting them over the head with the obvious questions that you're trying to find out what's going on?
Well, yeah, in a sense, because, as I mentioned to you in our earlier discussion, for these elements, this kind of the persuasive and creative to work, they need to have a number of strategies in play that kind of keep it moving. In a sense, so those 5 elements are the engine that drive the negotiating deal, and the strategies are the wheels. And one of the strategies, the one that you're alluding to, is a strategy called Get the Agenda. And what that essentially does is as early as you can in the conversation, is get a feel for somebody. Now, getting their agenda might not necessarily even mean asking any questions. It might just mean shutting up and let them talk. Let them tell you where they're at. And some people will tell you everything you want to know if you don't talk.
Oh, yeah.
But with others, it can be as simple as asking routine questions. Let me give you a little funny story here if I can. I got a book out, I think I mentioned it, or it's somewhere in my material, something called Because I Said So, which is a guide to negotiating with children and grown-ups. And one of the stories I tell in the book is one time when one of my sons was a teenager, and he decided he was going to take me on in a negotiation, which in itself was probably not very smart, but he was a teenager.
Yeah, they're not smart. Teenagers, they're built
what
not...
had happened was he was playing on a soccer team that I owned. I won't go into the details of it, but I owned one of these traveling soccer teams for a while, and he was the captain of the team. No surprises, of course, I owned the team, but they had this pre-season stuff where they were going to play indoors every Saturday for an hour. It's almost more like a basketball scene where you got 6 players at any given time on an indoor court, which is not typical for soccer. And was a bit tricky because there was 18 boys on the team. But anyway, to progress the story, the coach wanted maybe 10 boys there each week so that he didn't have so many boys that he couldn't get everybody some playing time. And he allowed them as young men, 17-year-olds, to figure out their own schedule. But I wanted my son there every week, And so for the first 3 weeks, that worked fine. And on the 4th week, I'm traveling. You know how that works, right? I was working somewhere on a Saturday at a conference. But I was going to get back. So I said to him before I left, I said, Scott, listen, son, don't forget we've got a game Saturday night. I'll be back Saturday afternoon. We'll be good to go. And yes, Dad. Anyway, I got a little bit delayed. You know how that works, too. But I get home to my house about 20, 30 minutes before we do the leave to go to the soccer game. So I'm kind of a little frazzled. And I get in. I said to my wife, is Scott ready? She's like, ready? He left, man. He's gone. I said, gone where? He said he went to play pool with his buddies. I said, no, you're kidding me, right? So she was amused by this. She's got a phone in her hand. She's like, call him. I want to see what happens. So I call him up, and this is where we get to our point about asking questions and establishing an agenda. I call him up. Now, I know where he is, and I know he's not going to lie to me because he's cleared it with his coach. He called the coach and told him he wasn't coming. And he told his mother where he was going. So I know he's not going to lie. So what I did was ask what appeared to be a completely innocuous question. So I called him on his cell phone. By the way, his first mistake there was answering it.
Yeah, I would never answer the cell phone when my dad called.
His smart move would have been to, what's the old expression? Better to ask for forgiveness than permission.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, that's what I would have done. I would have waited.
But the thing was, and I talked to him about this recently, he's a grown man now, but he actually thought he was ready for me. Him and his buddy had figured out how they were going to argue their point to stay at the pool. So I call him up, and he answers the phone. And what I said to him, and this is the point I wanted to get at, all I said to him, son, where are you? Now, I know where he is, and he knows I know where he is. But what the question does is it forces him to say something, to create a position of justification. So he's like, Dad, I'm playing pool. I spoke to the coach. He said it was okay. He got enough boys. He doesn't need me here this week. And I thought I'd give some of the other boys some playing time. And instantly, I recognized his argument. What he's done, Craig, using that kind of an argument, is he's created what's known as a logic argument. It made sense for him not to go, to give other boys some playing time.
Sure, it's rationalization.
Right, so what I do instantly is using my own techniques. I went straight into logic, and I said, son, I get that. I said, I understand that, but the fact is, your agreement was with me, not with the coach. And you and I had an agreement to meet and go to soccer. Have I got my facts right? So again, instead of confronting him, instead of putting pressure on him, I force him to look at the facts that he's presented and see the weakness in them. Because
Yeah.
essentially, if you've got a contract with somebody, Craig, you know this as well as anybody, you can't arbitrarily break that because some third party said it was okay.
Right. And this is it's very similar to when I always can tell when I used to have a truck, a pickup truck, and when you have a pickup truck, you are designated tacitly. You have accepted everybody's request to move. Then when they're moving their homes to an apartment, because you have a pickup truck, they always feel that you will help them. And so the first question they always ask is, "What are you up to this weekend?" Because they want you to say nothing. Oh, I'm nothing. That's all. And so that way you now have nothing to. Logically, you have nothing you can do.
So smart. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an innocuous question, but they positioned themselves now where they would have to argue against helping instead of you arguing in favor of them helping.
Which is why I learned to say, "Why? What's up?" That's the first question.
That what's up covers a lot of ground, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it's like I don't have to say a yes, I don't have to say no, but at least I can find out what the reason is, because nobody ever asks you what you're doing this weekend unless they, especially when you can tell they have that look when they walk up to you. So,
but the funny thing with my son, Craig, and I just get back to him, as soon as he realized that his argument based on logic had no traction, he was ready for me again, and he moved his argument. He went, "Well, I didn't think you'd mind, Dad. I never get to see my friends. I just needed a break." And, of course, immediately I could see where he'd gone now. Once he had no logic to support because I'd neutralized it with my own, he went into an emotional appeal. And I was smiling at the time because I thought, man, you are so not ready. When he said, "Dad, I didn't think you'd mind. I just wanted to see my buddies," I went, and I can't resist telling you this, but it's true. I went, "Son, it's not that I mind, but you dumped me, man. You had a meeting to meet with me, and now you've stranded me. Is that fair?" So the poor kid who thought he was going to get some emotional leverage ends up feeling bad because now I'm the one with the emotional leverage.
Yeah, that guilt is a very powerful emotion.
Oh, yeah, but he tried it on me, and I thought, man, don't try that. I'm going to be ready for that. And of course, the next thing he said was, he was so desperate because he wouldn't put in a power play with me. He said, "But can I stay anyway?" And I thought, man, how lame is that? And then I simply said, "No, you can't stay. You have an agreement. You want to get home. You don't need to be on the wrong side of me." And he came along. But here's where I want to move this on. Had he not agreed to come, based on my neutralizing both his logic and his emotion, and then I put in my power play, what if he just said, "Dad, I'm not coming"? Suddenly, he matches my power. Can you see what I'm getting at here?
Yep.
And the persuasive arguments then have kind of essentially been neutralized. And either I've got to make that power play, or I can move to the creative discussion.
Yeah, he's going to either call your bluff.
But if he'd have said, "Dad, I'm not coming. Deal with it," I'd have probably said, "Son, I don't know if you want to go down that road. But I tell you what I'll do. Come along to the game. I'll buy a nice dinner for you afterwards. I know you love lobster. We'll go and have some lobster." A trade-off, essentially.
And then if that didn't work, a little bit of a compromise. If
What
you do this,
says, "Dad, forget about it, man. I've already eaten." I'd said, "Son, okay, look, I know you want to play, but you don't want to be on the wrong side of me. I'll tell you that, son. But I'll tell you what I'll do. Play a game. Play another game. Stay another half hour, whatever you need to do, and go directly to the soccer face on your own and play the second half."
Well,
but the compromise is that he gets to play some pool and some soccer.
Right.
That's not complicated when you've got those 5 elements in your head. That's why negotiating is fairly simple when you're following the procedures.
And it's just a matter of practice, I'm assuming. Because
it's easy for me to talk about it. I've been doing it for 25 years. And as a speaker, you may get this thought clearly too, is that probably the person who learns most from what I talk about when I'm talking is me. Because I hear it all the time.
Well, sure. I would hope by now you're learning new little things that because you do it so much.
Right, and I spot little nuances here, and of course you get a good argument come from somebody who's listened to your session and wants to make a point, and that helps develop it. But here's a thought. I don't know if you're a football fan living down in Houston, and I do mean American football. You've got a fairly good team.
I'm a Patriots fan, so yes.
But here you go. You're going to get this little story then, because what I tell people, and this kind of makes sense, I think if you're a Patriots fan, you'll get this, is that I read a book about Bill Belichick a few years ago. It was written by a guy up here by the name of Michael Holley. But anyway, he wrote this book about Bill Belichick. And in the book, he says that for every game, Belichick spends, whatever it is, 12-hour days, 5, 6 days a week, preparing for the other team. And then at the end of the week, he goes to his players and he says, do these 4 or 5 things well. And then there may be a different 4 or 5 things with each team because different teams might have different issues. But he narrows it down to 4 or 5 key things they got to do to win the game. And I think what makes him so successful and respected by his players, when they do those 4 or 5 different things, they win the game. And that's what my game plan is essentially all about. Work through those 4 or 5 elements successfully, you'll do good deals.
And one of the strategies that I see that is about location. Because I totally agree, because I think if you boil it down to 4 or 5 things, the results happen, and nothing is more motivational and inspirational than results. You can tell people they're going to do a great job, and you can tell them that you believe in them, and you can tell them that you think they're great. But if they go out there and fall on their face, it doesn't matter. But if results come through, I think that's the most motivational thing you can ever do. So
I'm glad you said that, because that's the feedback I get from people, is they love the fact that it works the next day. That there's no learning curve required here. You just got to stay focused and obviously pay attention to what you've been taught. But essentially, once you've got it in your head, it's something you can do instantly and get results the very next day.
Yeah, and like I said, one of the strategies that I wanted to talk about, because I don't know what it is, and I want to find out about it, is when you talk about location.
Yeah, it sounds almost like some kind of
you get him in a back alley, and then you have a couple guys?
It's almost, I was going to say something like real estate, but no, really, what it translates to is when, where, and how. How you negotiate, where you negotiate, when you negotiate. The how is the one that probably speaks to the location most, because that's, do I want to do it face-to-face? Is it going to be on the telephone? Is it going to be some kind of a correspondence, moving back and forward? So one of the strategies that I try and control is how it's done. In terms of the location, are we going to do it on the phone? In which case I'd prefer to make the call than to receive the call, because essentially if you make the call, you are, by definition, I guess, more prepared than the other party who's receiving the call.
Yeah.
And then you can talk about correspondence. Sometimes I like correspondence, man, because the beauty of laying it out on a page is you don't have the tension that goes into a live negotiation. And you don't have to worry about the other party's responses in the moment. So you can lay out your case however you want to do it.
You can edit.
Face-to-face, the obvious advantages and disadvantages there.
Yeah, I think correspondence is great because you can have time to edit. In real life, you say things, and then almost, for me, immediately as I open my mouth, my brain is going, stop,
yeah.
and then it still comes out anyways.
So I do suggest as a strategy that, figure out how you want to do this before you start barging into it. And, of course, the second part is, where you want to do it. If you're going to do it face-to-face, do you want to do it kind of in a neutral location, or do you want to meet wherever the other party is? If it's business, for example, do you want to go to their business, or would you prefer them to meet you at your place of business? There are lots and lots of kind of advantages and disadvantages that we talk about on a case-by-case basis. And the other one is when. When do you want to do it? And the best time to negotiate is when clearly the other party needs it the most.
Yeah.
My son will tell you a story about that, because he just recently bought himself a BMW. He's a young guy, and he kind of likes to show off when he does good things for himself. And he just bought a new BMW, and he called me up and said, "Dad," he said, "I just bought a $42,000 BMW, and I got it for $32,000." I said, "Okay." I said, "How'd you do that?" He said, because he flattered me. He said, "Well, I read your book, Dad. That's how I did it." I said, "No, seriously, how'd it work?" He said, "Well, I timed it." He said, I've got it when they're trying to get rid of the old year cars because the new year cars are coming in."
Yep.
So in a sense, it can be as simple as get the timing of your negotiation to fit around who you're dealing with. They got new cars coming in. They got to get those old ones, even though they're brand new. They got to get them off the off the showroom floor.
Well,
there's lots of things. That location, one word doesn't give it much of a sense, but it's where, when, and how you do the deal is what we call the location strategy.
My dad was great at that because my dad's a sales guy, and he knew negotiation really well. And when I bought my first car, we were heading to the dealership, and I had seen the car that I wanted, so I knew what I wanted. So that but I didn't say anything. I just told him, and he's like, "Just keep your mouth shut." We went in at the end of the month, It was the end of the month, which is a big deal for the salespeople there. But before he went there, my dad stopped at the bank, and I didn't realize he went in and he got several $1,000s in cash. Because this is a used car. It's not a $50,000 car. It was like a $5,000 car. And so he went in, and we go into the dealership, and he poked his head into the break room because he kind of knew the layout. Because I'm come from a small town. He'd been to this dealership before. He looked, and he could see in the distance. He could see the sales chart. This is when they put them on the wall, and it was in markers. This is early '90s. There wasn't computers and all that stuff. He could see who was the best salesman and who was lacking, so to speak.
Gotcha.
And he said, I want to talk to that guy. So find the guy who hasn't sold as anything, Dave. And
he was good, your dad. Yeah, he was.
Yeah. He got Dave. We sat him down. He says, look, we want this car. We see that it's, I can't remember. I think it was $9,000. And he said, here's the credit situation. We start talking about, he starts negotiating the deal down. And so they say, well, we can get you that car for 7.2. And so my dad's starting to think about it. He's talking to him about it. And then he feels that he's got this guy on the hook. And he says, well, how much if I pay cash right now? And this is before all the financing, when actually I think they prefer you to finance because they get more money.
They do.
Yeah, but this is back when, someone pulled out a wad of cash, you knew a commission check was going to be written almost instantly.
Right.
And so he had he goes, and we got that car for 5.5.
You know what he did there? He used a strategy called trade concessions. In other words, I'll take the price that you're now projecting as the closing price, provided, or I'll give you, I will give you cash provided you give it to me at my price.
Yeah.
So all that's doing is, see, the thing about that trading concessions, which is one of those 6 strategies, is, without getting into detail because time doesn't permit, it's also a separate game plan because there are only 6 things in life that can be traded. There are only 6 things that you can use in order to trade one thing for another. And the beauty of that is, of course, it's an even number, so provided you don't give away more than 3 things, you can get 3 things back. But essentially what your dad was doing, he was using price against money. In other words, I'll give you... you give me my price, I'll give you money right now, what we call a time factor, where he would be doing it, getting cash right now for something that he would sell at a lower price than he might otherwise have done. It works within the parameters of what we call the trading model. So everything I hear, when I hear people talk about deals, as you did with your dad there, I'm constantly able to track them back to either the 6 strategies or the 5 elements. And I think that's what makes it so immediately applicable, Craig, is everything you do, one way or another, is within the game plan and a prescribed set of strategies. Well, once you've got them, you're good to go.
Well, before we let you go, because we do have a short on time, but I do want to talk about this last one. I think it's the one I use the most, its strategy, and it is walking away. And I think a lot of people feel that once you start negotiating, they almost feel guilty that like they have to finish the deal because they've already invested all this time. If they cancel or they walk away, they've wasted the other person's time, and that is not true.
Well, think about what you just said. If you've invested all that time, guess what? So have they. And so the thing about walking away anyway is that it's a strategy. It's not an end game. I mean, it's not necessarily some kind of theatrical getting up and leaving.
Oh, right. It's not storming out.
Like simple as saying, I'll have to talk it over with somebody, or I can't make a decision on that price right now. If we want to get it done right now, you're going to have to come to this price. In other words, what you're doing is you're using the thought process of walking away without necessarily ever having to do it. But there's a great catchphrase in there that I want to leave you with. I don't know how much time we got, but give me the catchphrase just in case it's the last thing we got. And I saw this in a jeweler's store years ago. It was a sales catchphrase, and I kind of translated it into negotiations. I'll give you the original catchphrase and then translate it. The guy in the jewelry store had a sign right there, right on the counter where the jewelry was, and the sign said, I will get over the disappointment of no sale quicker than the misery of a bad sale. And I thought, well, hey, that works for negotiations. I can get over the disappointment of no deal quicker than the misery of a bad deal. And I think what people have got to remember is doing a deal for its own sake probably means you're doing the other guy's deal, which means that you were not in control of the outcome. And who knows whether once they got you on that hook, they get you to do a deal because they see you're desperate or needy or you want to make them happy. Then who's to say they won't break that deal again and then make you come down even further? Sometimes you just got to let people know that I'd rather have no deal than a bad deal.
Absolutely, and I want to say that I think what we've done today has been a good deal, especially for me. I feel like I've got the most out of this one. Barry, where can people find you if they want to?
Well, they can get me at BarryElms.com. My website is there. That it talks about all the things I've done. And for those people who are on LinkedIn, of course, I'm on LinkedIn, and I try to keep that updated as well. And I see you're on there quite often, and we exchange thoughts from time to time on there, and it's a useful way for people to see what I'm doing and what I'm up to. But my website, BarryElms.com, I guess, is the most obvious place to head.
Great. Well, I look forward to meeting you in person in Atlanta at the end of September. And
I do too. I heard good things about what you do, man. So I'm kind of excited to see if I can spend a little time listening to either the front or the back end. I don't know what my schedule does for me, but either your first or your last session there will be interesting. So I hope we get a chance to meet while we're down there.
Hopefully the last session will have you in it, so that you probably want to listen to that one.
Yeah, I have to check my schedule, but that will be fun to observe.
Well, I appreciate your time, Barry, and I hope that you felt this was a win-win for you as well.
I really did. I enjoyed it. And look, you can never have too many connections in life, and it's always good to hang out with people that know your world, and you know my speaking world. So delighted to chat with you, man.
That's the show. I want to thank Barry Elms for coming on. Again, if you're going to be at the ALA Region 2 Conference in Atlanta this September 27th, his session on negotiation is at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be great, I'm sure, like it's going to be at 1:30 a.m. Remember, you can always follow us on Twitter at RealityCheckPod and follow us on Facebook to get the podcast directly in your feed. Any emails, questions, or comments can go to Craig at SpeakerCraigPrice.com. See you next week.